My name is Emily Carter, and I am 31 years old. On paper, I am a successful graphic designer with my own studio in Seattle, but in my family, I have always been the invisible middle child, the one who could never measure up. Last Christmas, as we sat around the dinner table, my mother looked me straight in the eyes and said the words that had been implied for years. "You are the most useless child we have." Everyone froze. That was when I finally stood up for myself. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Also, if family drama during holidays sounds familiar, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about setting boundaries with toxic family members. Growing up in suburban Denver, I always felt like an extra in the movie of my own family. My older brother Ethan was the golden child from day one. He was tall, athletic, and charming, with a natural talent for sports that made him the pride of our small community. Every weekend, our parents would drive for hours to watch his football games, cheering from the stands while I sat beside them with a book, trying to stay warm and entertained. His trophies lined the living room mantel, and dinner conversations revolved around his latest accomplishments or upcoming games. My older sister Olivia was not far behind in the family hierarchy. She was the perfect daughter in my mother's eyes, embodying all the traditional values that my mother held dear. Olivia got married at 22 to her high school sweetheart, had her first child at 24, and settled into the role of devoted wife and mother with apparent ease. My mother would constantly reference her during our phone calls. "Olivia made the most amazing pot roast for her in-laws yesterday," or "Olivia is redecorating the nursery all by herself. She is so creative." Then there was Sophia, the baby of the family, 6 years younger than me. From the moment she was born, she was coddled and protected, her every whim catered to without question. She could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Even when she dropped out of her first college program, it was dismissed as finding herself, and when she maxed out her first credit card, my parents paid it off without a second thought. And then there was me, Emily, caught in the middle. I was neither the athletic star, nor the traditional daughter, nor the baby who needed protection. I was quiet and creative, spending hours drawing and designing, lost in my own world of colors and shapes. My report cards were filled with A's and B's, but they were never celebrated like Ethan's game scores. My art won school competitions, but those certificates never made it to the refrigerator door alongside Sophia's finger paintings. My mother, Catherine, was the driving force of our family dynamic. A woman raised in a strict household herself, she had clear ideas about success and family roles. She was quick to compare, criticize, and correct. When I announced my intention to study graphic design in college, her response was cutting. "What kind of real job will you get with that? It's just drawing pictures." Even when I landed internships and later jobs with reputable firms, she would dismiss them as not real work. "Like what your father does." No matter what I achieved, it was never enough. When I made the dean's list, she would ask why I didn't get a specific scholarship that another student received. When I got a promotion, she would wonder aloud why it took so long. Her praise was rare and often backhanded. "Your apartment looks nice, but it must be so lonely living alone at your age." My father, James, was a different kind of disappointment. A quiet man who worked as an accountant, he seemed to care about me but lacked the courage to stand up to my mother. During particularly harsh criticisms, he might offer a mild, "Now, Catherine," but would quickly retreat if she turned her sharp tongue in his direction. Occasionally, he would slip me encouraging notes or make small gestures of support, but always when my mother wasn't looking. Our relationship became increasingly distant as I grew older. Phone calls with him were short and superficial, focused on weather and general news rather than anything meaningful. I sometimes caught glimpses of sadness in his eyes when he looked at me, as if he knew something was wrong but didn't know how to fix it. The pattern of unequal treatment became most apparent during significant life events. When I graduated from college with honors in graphic design, neither of my parents attended the ceremony. My mother had a garden club meeting she couldn't possibly miss, and my father claimed a work emergency. I sat alone during the ceremony, watching other families celebrate together, pretending that my family's absence didn't hurt. When I landed my first major client at 25 and was featured in a design magazine, I excitedly shared the news during a Sunday dinner. My mother glanced at the magazine for less than a minute before changing the subject to Ethan's new sales position. My accomplishment was forgotten before the dessert was served. Even family photos told the story of my outsider status. In the large portrait hanging in my parents' living room, Ethan and Olivia stood directly behind our seated parents. Sophia perched on our mother's lap, while I was positioned slightly to the side, as if I had been added as an afterthought. Year after year, holiday after holiday, the pattern continued. My achievements were minimized, my presence often an inconvenience. Family events became exercises in invisibility, where I would help in the kitchen, take photos of everyone else, and listen to stories about my siblings' lives while rarely being asked about my own. Despite all this, some part of me still yearned for their approval, for some acknowledgement that I was a valuable member of the family. I kept showing up, kept trying, kept hoping that someday things would change. But as the years passed, that hope grew thinner, stretched nearly to its breaking point by the time I reached my early 30s. What my family failed to see, or perhaps chose not to see, was that I had built a life I was proud of, piece by careful piece. My career in graphic design had not been an easy path, but it had been a fulfilling one. After graduating from college, I started at a small design agency, making barely enough to cover rent and student loans. I worked late nights and weekends building my portfolio while taking on freelance projects on the side. My tiny studio apartment doubled as my workspace, with my drafting table taking up most of the living area. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, investing what little extra money I had in better design software and equipment. The first 2 years were especially tough. I faced rejection after rejection from larger agencies and clients who wanted more experience than I had to offer. But I persisted, refining my skills and slowly building a network of contacts in the industry. I started specializing in branding for small businesses, helping them create identities that could compete with larger companies. By my 27th birthday, I had saved enough to rent a small commercial space and officially launched my own studio, Carter Design Works. It was nothing fancy, just a converted loft with large windows and enough space for me and, eventually, to part-time employees. But it was mine. Built from nothing but hard work and determination. The turning point came when I landed a contract with Cascade Breweries, a regional craft beer company looking to rebrand and expand nationally. I worked tirelessly on their project, creating a visual identity that honored their local roots while appealing to a broader audience. The campaign was a massive success, increasing their sales by 35% in the first quarter and earning industry recognition. That one success led to others. Within 2 years, my client list included 3 national brands and dozens of successful regional businesses. I had to move to a larger office space and hire 5 full-time employees. My work was featured in design publications, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences. My studio was now generating over $500,000 in annual revenue, with a reputation for creative excellence and reliability. Financially, I was more secure than anyone in my family knew. I owned my condominium outright, had a healthy retirement account, and maintained a substantial emergency fund. I paid myself a reasonable salary but reinvested most of the profits back into the business, allowing it to grow steadily year after year. My personal life had also taken shape in ways my family never bothered to learn about. I had been dating Daniel for nearly 3 years, a kind and supportive architect I met at a design conference. While we were not rushing toward marriage, we had built a solid relationship based on mutual respect and shared values. Daniel understood my family situation and provided the emotional support I had always lacked at home. I had also cultivated a close circle of friends who appreciated me for who I was. Lauren, my best friend since college, lived in the same building, and we had dinner together at least once a week. My studio team had become a second family of sorts, celebrating birthdays and achievements together, supporting each other through challenges. I had developed interests and hobbies that brought me joy. I took pottery classes on Wednesday evenings, finding peace in the tactile process of creating something with my hands. I volunteered monthly at a youth art program, helping kids from disadvantaged backgrounds express themselves through creativity. I had even taken up hiking, spending many weekends exploring trails outside the city, often accompanied by Daniel or friends. Yet, despite all these accomplishments and the full life I had created, there remained a hollow ache inside me. Some part of me still longed for my family's approval, for them to see me as I truly was, rather than as the disappointing middle child they had decided I was years ago. This longing led me to continue a pattern of behavior that, in retrospect, only reinforced the dysfunctional dynamic. I became the family's unofficial financial safety net, always ready with my checkbook when emergencies arose. It started small, with a loan to my father when his car needed expensive repairs. Then came help with Sophia's college tuition when my parents claimed they were stretched too thin. The requests increased in frequency and amount over time, especially from my mother, who managed the family finances. The most significant financial support went to Ethan, though this was something the rest of the family did not know. Despite his outward appearance of success, My brother had made a series of poor financial decisions, including risky investments and living well beyond his means. 3 years ago, he came to me in desperation, facing potential bankruptcy and the loss of his home. I paid off his most urgent debts and established a payment plan for him to repay me, though he had yet to make more than token payments. I also contributed substantially to family events, often covering the cost of holiday meals or birthday celebrations, while letting my parents take credit for the hospitality. When my father needed a new suit for a cousin's wedding, I quietly bought it and let him believe it was on sale. When my mother mentioned wanting new kitchen appliances, they mysteriously appeared as an early birthday present from the whole family, though I was the only one who paid. All of this assistance was given quietly, without acknowledgement or gratitude. In fact, the more I helped, the more my family seemed to take it for granted that I would be there with my wallet open whenever they needed something. My mother, especially, seemed to view my financial support not as generosity but as an obligation, some form of repayment for raising me. Despite my success, I still struggled with feelings of inadequacy whenever I was around my family. In their presence, I reverted to the invisible middle child, desperate for scraps of approval. I would downplay my achievements to avoid accusations of bragging, accept criticism without defense, and swallow hurt feelings rather than cause conflict. It was exhausting, this constant diminishing of myself to fit into the role they had assigned me. Daniel often questioned why I continued to subject myself to this treatment, why I kept showing up for family events that left me emotionally drained, why I continued to provide financial support without recognition. I never had a good answer, only that they were family, and despite everything, I still cared about them. But with each passing year, each dismissive comment, each financial request disguised as familial obligation, I could feel my patience wearing thinner, my resentment growing deeper, and my self-respect demanding more. The financial dynamic between my family and me had evolved into something increasingly toxic over the years. What started as occasional help had morphed into an expected safety net, always available but never acknowledged. My mother's calls followed a predictable pattern. She would start with brief, disinterested questions about my life, barely listening to my responses before sighing deeply and mentioning some financial predicament. "The roof is leaking again," she would say, "or your father's prescription costs have gone up." She never directly asked for money, instead, dropping heavy hints until I offered to help, allowing her to maintain the fiction that she hadn't asked. After accepting my assistance, she would quickly dismiss it. "Well, that's what family is for," she would say, or, more pointedly, "It's the least you can do, considering all we did for you growing up." There was never a thank you, never an acknowledgement of the sacrifice or generosity involved. Instead, my financial help was reframed as a duty, an obligation I owed rather than a gift I gave. This pattern extended beyond my parents. Ethan would call with tales of temporary cash flow problems, promising to repay me next month for years running. Olivia rarely asked directly but would complain about the costs of raising children until I offered to buy my nieces and nephews expensive gifts or contribute to their education funds. Sophia had come to expect that I would cover her financial emergencies without question, whether it was car repairs or rent when she had spent too much on clothes. Family gatherings had become increasingly difficult to endure. Each holiday or celebration was marked by subtle digs and not-so-subtle comparisons that left me feeling diminished and defensive. Last Thanksgiving had been particularly brutal. Within minutes of arriving at my parents' house, my mother looked me up and down and asked if I had given up on dating entirely since I had come alone again. When I mentioned that I was actually in a serious relationship with Daniel, she dismissed him as just another boyfriend, and wondered aloud why I couldn't seal the deal like Olivia had with her husband. During dinner, as I tried to share news about a major new client my studio had landed, my mother interrupted to ask Olivia about her children's school activities. The conversation never returned to my news. Later, as we washed dishes together, my mother remarked that it was probably for the best that I focused on my little drawing business. Since I wasn't cut out for motherhood anyway, I left that night with a migraine and a promise to myself that I would skip Christmas. But as December approached, guilt and hope battled within me. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this year they would see me. At my mother's birthday celebration in early December, the pattern continued. As we sat in an expensive restaurant, which I had paid for but was presented as my father's treat, my mother spent the entire meal discussing my siblings' accomplishments while ignoring mine. When I mentioned being featured in a national design magazine, she changed the subject to Sophia's new internship, despite it being her third attempt at finding a career path. As the date of the family Christmas gathering approached, my anxiety intensified. I considered various excuses to avoid attending, but ultimately decided to go after a long conversation with Daniel. "You need to stand up for yourself, Emily," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not that insecure teenager anymore. You're a successful business owner who deserves respect." "They're never going to change," I argued, pacing around our living room. "Going there is just signing up for more of the same." "Then maybe it's time you changed how you respond," he countered. "You keep hoping they'll suddenly see your worth, but you need to show them that you know your own value, whether they recognize it or not." His words stayed with me in the days leading up to Christmas. I spent hours selecting thoughtful, expensive gifts for everyone, wrapping them perfectly, as if beautiful packaging could somehow make my family appreciate me. I made an appointment to have my hair and makeup done, choosing an outfit that projected success and confidence rather than my usual attempt to blend into the background at family functions. The day before Christmas, I received a call from Ethan that would prove to be the final straw in an already precarious situation. He sounded nervous, his voice lower than usual, as if he was calling from somewhere private. "Emily, I hate to ask this, especially right now, but I'm in a really tight spot," he began. I closed my eyes, already knowing what was coming. "The bank is threatening foreclosure if I don't make a payment by the end of the year. I just need $15,000 to get them off my back until my commission comes through in February." $15,000. It was not an insignificant amount, even with my financial stability. It was money I had been setting aside for a potential expansion of my studio. "Ethan, that's a lot of money," I said carefully. "And you still haven't paid back the last loan?" I know, he said quickly. "But this is different. This is my house. Emily, where will Claire and the kids go if we lose it? Please, I'm begging you. And please don't tell Mom and Dad. You know how they are. They still think I'm doing great." After a long pause, I agreed to transfer the money, adding it to the mental tally I kept of funds that would likely never be repaid. After hanging up, I called Lauren, needing to vent my frustration. "You've got to stop being their ATM," Lauren said bluntly after listening to my story. "They're adults, Emily. Adults who should be responsible for their own financial decisions. But what am I supposed to do? Let Ethan and his family become homeless? Maybe facing real consequences would force him to make better choices," she countered. "And more importantly, when are you going to stand up for yourself and demand the respect you deserve? These people take and take from you, and they can't even be bothered to show basic appreciation." As I prepared for bed that night, Lauren's words mingled with Daniel's advice from earlier in the week. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge the anger I had been suppressing for years. I was tired of being the family bank account. Tired of having my success dismissed. Tired of shrinking myself to avoid rocking the boat. I made a decision as I drifted off to sleep. This Christmas would be different. I would not sit quietly and accept disrespect. I would not offer financial help without acknowledgement. If they couldn't see my worth, I would show it to them. And if that meant conflict, so be it. Some relationships needed to break before they could heal. I arrived at my parents' suburban home at precisely 4 p.m. on Christmas Day, the trunk of my car filled with elegantly wrapped gifts. The two-story colonial looked picture-perfect, with white lights outlining the roof and windows, a wreath on the red front door, and artificial candles glowing in each window. It was exactly the same decoration scheme they had used since I was a child, never varying by so much as a ribbon. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my composure and the first load of presents before making my way to the front door. I could hear laughter and conversation from inside, the sound momentarily making me question my resolve. Part of me still longed to be truly included in those warm family moments rather than merely tolerated at the periphery. My father answered the door, his eyes crinkling with what seemed like genuine pleasure at seeing me. "Emily, you made it," he said, stepping aside to let me in. He was dressed in his Christmas sweater, the same green one with reindeer that my mother had given him at least 5 years ago. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I replied, offering a smile and shifting the packages in my arms so I could give him a quick hug. "Could you help me bring in the rest of the gifts? There are several more in the car." His eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of multiple gifts, but he nodded and followed me outside. As we retrieved the remaining packages, he made small talk about the unseasonably warm weather and the traffic on the highways, carefully avoiding anything substantial or personal. Inside, the house was warm and filled with the smells of roasting turkey and pine. The large Christmas tree dominated the living room, surrounded by presents already several layers deep. Family photos lined the mantel, mostly featuring Ethan's family and Olivia's children, with only one small frame containing a graduation photo of me from nearly a decade ago. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron embroidered with holly leaves. Her critical gaze swept over me, taking in my designer dress, professionally styled hair, and the armload of packages. "You're finally here," she said, her tone suggesting I was late, though I had arrived exactly at the time she specified. "Olivia brought her famous sweet potato casserole, and Ethan is telling us about his new sales territory." No greeting. No Merry Christmas. No comment on my appearance or the obvious effort I had made. I swallowed the familiar hurt and nodded, moving to arrange my gifts under the tree, while my father disappeared back into the living room where the others were gathered. The next hour was a whirlwind of strained greetings and forced conversation. Olivia, immaculately dressed as always, gave me a quick hug before returning to her story about her oldest daughter's dance recital. Ethan clapped me on the shoulder with his characteristic overconfidence, though I noticed new worry lines around his eyes. His wife Claire offered a sympathetic smile, one of the few genuine reactions I received. Sophia, home from her latest college attempt, barely looked up from her phone to acknowledge my arrival. When it came time to open gifts, I watched as my carefully selected presents were received with muted appreciation. The expensive leather briefcase I had bought my father earned a polite thank you, though I suspected he didn't realize its actual value. My mother briefly admired the spa package and designer scarf I had given her before setting them aside to organize the gift opening for others. The limited edition collectibles I had tracked down for my siblings were acknowledged with surprise but quickly overshadowed by the excitement over other gifts. As we moved to the dining room for dinner, I found myself seated at the far end of the table, opposite from my mother at the head, with my father at the other end. The symbolism was not lost on me. Ethan and Olivia occupied the places of honor nearest our parents, with their spouses and children filling in the middle. Sophia sat on my mother's other side, leaving me isolated at my end, except for my 9-year-old nephew beside me. The table was beautifully set with my mother's best china and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier light. The turkey was perfectly browned, surrounded by all the traditional sides: stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and Olivia's sweet potato dish. Given pride of place near my mother, conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. My mother asked detailed questions about Ethan's work, nodding with approval as he boasted about potential commissions and new clients, all of us pretending not to know about his financial troubles. When he mentioned a luxury vacation he was planning for summer, I had to take a long sip of wine to keep from commenting on how this reconciled with his need to borrow money for his mortgage. Olivia dominated the next segment of conversation with stories of her children's accomplishments and her extensive volunteer work at their private school. My mother beamed with pride, frequently interjecting with additional praise or asking for more details about the school fundraiser Olivia was chairing. "You know, Emily, you should consider volunteering somewhere," my mother said, suddenly turning her attention to me for the first time since we sat down. "It would be good for you to get out and meet people, especially since you spend so much time alone with your computer." Before I could respond that I already volunteered regularly with an arts program for underprivileged youth, Olivia jumped in. "Oh Mom, you know Emily is busy with her design stuff," she said, her tone suggesting that my career was a hobby rather than a successful business. "Not everyone has time for community service." I took another sip of wine, reminding myself of my resolution to stand up for myself. "Actually, I volunteer twice a month with an arts program for kids from low-income neighborhoods," I said, keeping my voice even, "and my studio donates design services to several nonprofits annually." There was a brief pause as this information registered before my mother simply said, "Well, that's nice," and turned to Sophia. "Tell everyone about your new internship, dear." Sophia launched into a description of her latest career exploration, an unpaid position at a local magazine that she had already complained to me about hating. My mother and father listened attentively, asking questions and offering encouragement as if this was the most interesting news of the day. When there was finally a lull in the conversation, I decided to share my own news. "My studio was actually featured in Design Quarterly last month," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "They did a 4-page spread on our rebranding work for Blue Horizon Technologies." "Oh, is that one of those online magazines?" my mother asked dismissively. "No, it's one of the most prestigious print publications in the design industry," I corrected. "Being featured is a significant achievement." "Speaking of achievements," my mother said, already turning away, "Olivia, did you tell Emily about Ava making the honor roll again?" The conversation shifted once more, my news dismissed before it could even be properly acknowledged. I felt the familiar sting but reminded myself that their validation was not necessary for my success to be real. As dessert was being served, Ethan unexpectedly brought the conversation back to me. Hey, was Blue Horizon Technologies that big software company? I think I saw something about their new look. That was your work. Surprised by his interest, I nodded. Yes, we completely redesigned their visual identity and user interface. It was a 6-month project. That's impressive, Emily, he said, using my childhood nickname. Those guys are huge. Thank you, I replied, genuinely touched by this rare acknowledgement from a family member. My mother frowned slightly. I can't imagine they paid much for just some new colors and fonts, she said. Now, who wants coffee with their pie? I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Actually, Mom, it was a complete strategic rebrand that increased their user engagement by 40%. The contract was worth over $200,000 to my studio. A silence fell over the table. My father looked up from his pie with raised eyebrows, while Olivia stopped mid-bite. Even Sophia put down her phone. My mother's expression hardened. There's no need to exaggerate, Emily. We all know graphic design is just a step above making posters for school events. I'm not exaggerating, I said firmly. My business employs 7 people full-time and generates over $500,000 in annual revenue. My mother put down her fork with a sharp clink against the china plate. Her eyes narrowed as she looked directly at me. If you're doing so well, why do you insist on living alone in that tiny apartment? Why aren't you married with a family like your sister? Success isn't just about money, Emily. And frankly, I've always thought you exaggerate your accomplishments. You've always been our dreamer. I sat perfectly still, feeling as if I had been slapped. My condo is over 2,000 square feet. Mom, you've never even visited it. She waved her hand dismissively. The point is, at your age, you should have more to show for your life than some drawings and a fancy apartment. Olivia has given us 3 beautiful grandchildren. Ethan has built a successful career in a respectable field. Even Sophia is finding her way. The tension around the table was palpable now. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Catherine, perhaps this isn't the time, but my mother wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that quietly cutting tone I knew so well. Let's be honest, Emily. You've always been different, always in your own little world. We've tried to guide you toward a more conventional path, but you insist on this artsy lifestyle. And what do you have to show for it? No husband, no children, just clients who could replace you tomorrow. I stared at her, barely breathing. Decades of dismissal and criticism crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. This was who she was. This was who they all were. And no amount of success on my part would ever change that. The truth is, she continued, her voice now carrying that final judgmental tone. You are the most useless child we have. The words hung in the air, like smoke. Ethan looked down at his plate. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. My father half rose from his seat, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. Sophia's eyes widened in shock. Something broke inside me in that moment, but it wasn't my spirit. It was the chain of silence and accommodation that had bound me for decades. I slowly stood up, my napkin falling, forgotten, to the floor. The chair made a harsh scraping sound against the hardwood that seemed to echo in the silent room. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, no longer afraid of her judgment. My voice was steady and clear when I finally spoke. Then stop calling me when you need money. The silence that followed my words was absolute. My mother's face drained of color, her mouth opening slightly, but no sound emerging. She looked as if she had been struck, her usual composure completely shattered. My father half rose from his chair, his expression cycling rapidly between confusion and alarm. Emily, what are you talking about? He asked, though the uncertainty in his voice suggested he already knew. Ethan stared fixedly at his plate, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. His wife Claire looked between us with dawning comprehension, her gaze finally settling on Ethan with a question she was afraid to ask aloud. Olivia sat perfectly still, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Her husband reached for her hand, equally confused by the sudden turn in the conversation. Sophia was the first to break, tears welling in her eyes. Emily, she whispered, sounding suddenly very young. But I wasn't done. Years of suppressed feelings came pouring out, unstoppable now that the dam had broken. Let me tell you all what useless looks like, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Useless is not the person who has built a successful business from nothing. Useless is not the person who paid for Dad's car repairs last year when the transmission went out. Useless is not the person who covered half of Sophia's tuition when you claimed you couldn't afford it. I turned to Ethan, who still wouldn't look at me. Useless is not the person who saved your house from foreclosure 3 separate times. Ethan, $15,000 just yesterday, remember? On top of the $27,000 you already owed me. Claire gasped, turning to her husband. Ethan, is that true? You told me your boss gave you an advance on your commission. Ethan finally looked up, his face a mask of shame. Emily, you promised not to say anything, he muttered. No, what I did was enable you to keep lying to everyone about how successful you are, I replied, not unkindly, but firmly. I've been covering for all of you for years. Pretending along with you that everything is fine when it isn't. I turned back to my mother, whose shock was transforming into anger. You've called me at least once a month for the past 5 years, asking for money. Mom, the new refrigerator. I paid for it. Dad's special heart medication not covered by insurance. Me. The repairs to the roof last spring. Also, me. I've given this family over $100,000 in the past 3 years alone. And not once has anyone said thank you. Not once has anyone acknowledged that my little drawing business has been keeping this family afloat. My father sank back into his chair, his face ashen. Emily, I didn't know. Your mother told me those things were covered by savings or insurance. Of course you didn't know, I said, softening my tone slightly. No one was supposed to know. It was our family's dirty little secret that the useless daughter was the one everyone turned to when they needed bailing out. Olivia found her voice at last. But you never said anything. You always acted like it was no big deal when we needed help. Because I wanted to be valued by this family, I admitted, feeling suddenly vulnerable. I thought if I could just be useful enough, important enough, someday you would see me. Really see me? But that was never going to happen, was it? I looked around at their stunned faces. Feeling strangely calm now that the truth was finally out in the open, my mother's composure was returning. Her jaw setting in that familiar stubborn line. You have no right to air our private business like this, she said coldly. If you've helped the family financially, that's what family does for each other. It doesn't give you the right to throw it in our faces. No. Mom, what family does is support each other emotionally as well as financially. What family does is celebrate each other's successes and help each other through failures. What family does is see each other as we really are, not as who you want us to be. I took a deep breath, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation but knowing I needed to finish what I had started. For years, I've been trying to earn your approval, your love, by being the family fixer. I now realize that was never going to work. You don't want a successful daughter. You want a compliant one. The truth about Ethan's financial situation continued to ripple through the room. Claire was whispering urgently to him, her expression a mixture of hurt and betrayal. You told me we were doing fine, I heard her say. We just bought a new car. We have to keep up appearances, Ethan hissed back. Everyone expects us to be successful. Is that why we're in debt up to our eyeballs? Claire shot back, no longer bothering to keep her voice down. Because you're trying to impress your parents. Olivia was looking increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued. Emily, I had no idea you were supporting everyone like this, she said quietly. You should have said something. Would it have made a difference? I asked her directly. Would you have suddenly started treating me with respect instead of condescension? Would Mom have stopped comparing me unfavorably to you at every opportunity? Olivia, at least, had the grace to look ashamed. I never meant to make you feel less than, she said. I guess I just got used to being the favorite daughter. Sophia was openly crying now. Did you really pay for half my tuition? She asked through tears. Mom and Dad told me they took out a second mortgage. I nodded, feeling a rush of sympathy for my youngest sister, who had been as much a pawn in the family dynamic as I had been. They didn't want you to know. They didn't want anyone to know that the family finances weren't as solid as they pretended. My father stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped. Emily is right, he said, his voice stronger than I had heard it in years. We haven't been honest with ourselves or each other, and we haven't treated Emily fairly. He looked at my mother, who stared back in disbelief. Catherine, our daughter deserves an apology, but my mother wasn't ready to concede. This is ridiculous, she snapped. If Emily chose to help the family financially, that was her decision. No one forced her, and if she feels unappreciated, perhaps she should consider that giving with the expectation of gratitude isn't really giving at all. Her words confirmed what I had already known. There would be no acknowledgement, no apology, no change. Not today, perhaps not ever. I nodded slowly, accepting this reality at last. You're right about one thing, Mom. No one forced me. I chose to help because I love this family, despite everything. But I'm making a different choice now. I walked away from the table and headed upstairs to the guest room where I had left my overnight bag. The room was unchanged from my teenage years, with the same purple bedspread and posters of bands I had long outgrown. It felt like a museum to a person who no longer existed. I quickly gathered my things, hearing raised voices from downstairs as the revelations continued to rock the family. Part of me felt guilty for the chaos I had created on Christmas Day, but a stronger part felt relieved that the truth was finally out in the open. Whether they chose to address it or continue in denial was now their decision, not my responsibility. As I came back downstairs with my bag, my father intercepted me in the hallway. Emily, please don't leave like this, he pleaded, his voice breaking slightly. We can talk about this. We can fix things. I looked at him with genuine compassion. Dad, this can't be fixed in one conversation. This has been building for decades. I need space right now. And honestly, I think the family needs time to process everything that's been said. I had no idea, he said quietly, about the money, about how you felt. I knew things weren't perfect, but I didn't realize. I know, Dad, I said gently, and that's part of the problem. You haven't wanted to see the reality of our family dynamic for a very long time. He nodded sadly, then surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I should have said that more often. I hugged him back, feeling a complicated mixture of love, sadness, and relief. When we separated, I saw tears in his eyes that mirrored my own. From the dining room, I could hear my mother's voice rising in indignation, Ethan and Claire arguing in hushed but intense tones, and Olivia trying unsuccessfully to restore order. It was the sound of a carefully constructed facade finally crumbling under the weight of long-suppressed truths. Without another word to my father, I walked to the front door, stepped out into the cold December evening, and closed the door firmly behind me. In my car, I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, letting out a long, shaky breath that seemed to carry years of tension with it. As I drove away from my childhood home, Christmas lights blurring through my tears, I felt something unexpected, not regret or even anger, but a profound sense of freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth without apology or compromise. Whatever happened next, I would face it as my authentic self, no longer contorted into the shape my family expected me to fit. The drive back to my condominium was surreal. Christmas lights twinkled from houses and storefronts. Holiday music played softly on the radio. And the world continued as normal, while my personal reality had been completely upended. Tears came in waves, not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming release of emotions I had contained for so long. When I arrived home, I sat in my parking space for several minutes, gathering the strength to go inside and face the aftermath of what had just happened. My phone had been buzzing constantly in my purse, but I hadn't yet looked at it. Part of me wanted to throw it into the snow and never look back. Finally, I made my way upstairs to my condo, dropping my keys and bag by the door before collapsing onto my sofa. Only then did I check my phone. 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. A digital avalanche of family fallout. The first call I returned was to Daniel. He answered immediately, concern evident in his voice. Emily, are you okay? I've been worried sick. You were supposed to call after dinner. I tried to explain what had happened, but my voice broke, and tears came again. I did it, Daniel. I finally stood up to them, but it was so much worse than I expected. He listened patiently as I recounted the evening's events. From my mother's cutting remark to my explosive response and hasty departure. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before he spoke. I'm so proud of you, he said finally. That took incredible courage. It doesn't feel like courage, I admitted. It feels like I just blew up my entire family on Christmas Day. Maybe that needed to happen, he suggested gently. Sometimes things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt into something healthier. We talked for nearly an hour, his calm perspective helping me process the swirling emotions. When we finally hung up, he offered to come over, but I declined, needing time alone to collect my thoughts. After a hot shower and change of clothes, I returned to my phone, steeling myself to face the barrage of messages. I decided to read rather than listen, not yet ready to hear the actual voices of my family members. Sophia's texts came first, A series of increasingly emotional messages. Emily, are you okay? I had no idea about the tuition. I'm so sorry. Please call me. I love you. I feel awful. I never saw how mom treated you. I was so wrapped up in my own stuff. Her messages were the most straightforward and genuinely remorseful. Which didn't surprise me. Of all my siblings, Sophia had the least investment in the family's dysfunctional patterns. Ethan had sent only 2 messages. Brief and awkward. We need to talk about this privately. Claire is really upset. Thanks a lot. His response was exactly what I would have expected. Focused on damage control rather than addressing the underlying issues or taking responsibility. Olivia's messages were longer and more complex. I'm in shock right now. I never realized how much you were doing for everyone financially. Mom is absolutely beside herself. Dad took her upstairs after you left. I know we haven't always been close, but I want you to know, I respect what you've accomplished. I think I've been jealous of your freedom. To be honest, that last message surprised me. Olivia, jealous of me, the perfect daughter who had always done everything right by our mother's standards. It had never occurred to me that she might envy my less conventional path. There was a single text from my father, simple but heartfelt. I failed you as a father. I'm so sorry, Emily, I love you. Notably absent was any message from my mother. I wasn't surprised. But the confirmation of her reaction still stung. I turned off my phone after reading the messages. Not yet ready to respond to any of them. Instead, I wrapped myself in a blanket on my sofa, staring at the small Christmas tree in the corner of my living room, its lights blinking steadily in the darkness. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my windows and a strange sense of lightness. Despite the emotional turmoil of the previous day, I had slept more deeply than I had in months. As if a great weight had been lifted from my subconscious, I made coffee and checked my phone again. Overnight, Sophia had sent a long email rather than more texts. She wrote about how she had always looked up to me but had been influenced by our mother's dismissive attitude. She apologized for taking my help for granted and promised to be more aware of the family dynamics going forward. Her words were thoughtful and mature, showing a depth I hadn't given her credit for. There was also an email from my father, longer and more detailed than his text. He explained that he and my mother had argued late into the night, with him finally confronting her about her treatment of me over the years. He admitted to his own cowardice in not standing up for me sooner and asked for a chance to rebuild our relationship on more honest terms. He ended by saying he was proud of the woman and professional I had become, words I had longed to hear from him for decades. The most surprising communication came from Ethan, not a text or email, but a bank transfer notification for $5,000, with the memo, first repayment, more to come. It was a small fraction of what he owed me, but the acknowledgement meant more than the money. Over the next few weeks, I maintained my distance while processing what had happened. I responded selectively to messages, setting boundaries that would have been unthinkable before. I told Sophia I would be happy to talk when she returned to the city after the holidays. I thanked Ethan for the partial repayment but declined his suggestion to just move past this whole thing. I arranged to meet my father for coffee in January in a neutral location, away from my mother's influence. Daniel was my rock throughout this period, offering support without pushing me in any particular direction. This is your journey, he said. I'm here whatever you decide. Lauren was more direct in her assessment when we met for our weekly dinner. It's about damn time, she declared, raising her glass in a toast to Emily, who finally found her voice. I'm still not sure if I did the right thing, I admitted, especially doing it on Christmas Day in front of everyone. Sometimes, the right thing and the comfortable thing are completely different, she replied. They've been comfortable with their version of reality for years while you've been suffocating. Maybe a little discomfort is exactly what they needed. In January, I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who specialized in family dynamics. Our sessions helped me understand that my confrontation hadn't created the family dysfunction, but merely exposed what had been there all along. Your mother exhibits classic narcissistic behaviors, Dr. Martinez explained during one session. She created a family system where everyone played assigned roles to maintain her vision of the perfect family. You disrupted that system by refusing to play your assigned role any longer. What happens now? I asked. That depends partly on you and partly on them, she replied. You can't control how they respond, but you can decide what kind of relationship you're willing to accept moving forward. With Dr. Martinez's guidance, I began to establish clear boundaries. I would no longer automatically provide financial assistance when asked. I would expect basic respect and acknowledgement of my accomplishments. I would not subject myself to criticism or comparison. And perhaps, most importantly, I would no longer shrink myself to make others comfortable. The process was not easy or linear. There were difficult conversations, setbacks, and moments of doubt. My mother remained resistant to change, clinging to her narrative that I was being selfish and overly sensitive. But incremental shifts began to occur in my relationships with other family members. Ethan, facing the reality of his financial situation without my safety net, finally had honest conversations with Claire about their finances. They downsized to a more affordable home and began working with a financial counselor. Our relationship remained strained, but there was a new honesty between us that felt like progress. Olivia and I began to develop a genuine friendship for the first time in our adult lives. Without our mother's constant comparisons driving us apart, we discovered common ground and mutual respect. She confessed that her seemingly perfect life had its own significant challenges, and I shared more about my business successes and struggles. Sophia returned to school with a new determination, no longer taking financial support for granted. She began stopping by my studio regularly, showing genuine interest in my work and occasionally asking for career advice. Our age difference, which had always made us feel like strangers, now seemed less significant as we related to each other as adults. My father made the most dramatic changes. He began standing up to my mother more frequently, refusing to enable her manipulative behavior. He visited my studio and met Daniel, showing genuine interest in my life for the first time. During one particularly meaningful conversation, he admitted that he had always admired my creativity and independence but had been too intimidated by my mother to show it. Throughout these months of family recalibration, I continued to focus on my own growth and happiness. My business thrived, my relationship with Daniel deepened, and I developed a new confidence in social situations that had previously made me anxious. I began speaking at design conferences, mentoring young designers, and even teaching a course at the local art college. The most profound change, however, was internal. I no longer measured my worth by my family's approval. I no longer felt the need to earn love through financial support or accomplishments. I began to truly believe what I had intellectually known for years, that I was successful, capable, and worthy of respect simply for being who I was. When Daniel proposed in late spring, I accepted with joy, uncomplicated by worries about family reactions. We planned a small wedding that would reflect our values rather than anyone else's expectations. And when the inevitable questions arose about who would be invited and what roles family members would play, I made decisions based on what felt right to me rather than what would cause the least conflict. By summer, I had not spoken directly to my mother in over 6 months. Through my father, I knew that she was still angry about my public humiliation of the family, still unwilling to acknowledge her role in the dysfunctional dynamic. While part of me still hoped for reconciliation, I had accepted that it might never happen on terms that would be healthy for me. What surprised me most about this period of estrangement was not the pain, which I had anticipated, but the relief. Without the constant drain of trying to earn my mother's approval, I had more emotional energy for the people and pursuits that actually brought me joy. The absence of toxic interactions created space for positive ones, and I found myself happier and more at peace than I had been in years. The following Christmas approached with a mixture of anxiety and hope. I had maintained varying levels of contact with different family members throughout the year but had not yet decided whether to attend the annual family gathering. Daniel left the decision entirely up to me, offering to support whatever choice I made. After much consideration and several productive sessions with Dr. Martinez, I decided to go, but with crucial differences from previous years. I would stay at a hotel rather than in my childhood home. I would bring Daniel, insisting that my partner of now for years be included and respected. And most importantly, I would arrive with clear boundaries and the willingness to leave if those boundaries were violated. Think of it as an experiment in your new family dynamic. Dr. Martinez suggested, you're not returning to the old patterns but testing whether new, healthier ones are possible. When we arrived at my parents' house on Christmas Eve, the atmosphere was noticeably different from previous years. My father greeted us warmly at the door, embracing both Daniel and me with genuine affection. Sophia rushed forward next, her face lighting up at the sight of us. Olivia offered a tentative but sincere smile. Her husband and children lined up behind her. My mother stood slightly apart, her expression carefully neutral. She had agreed, through my father, to certain conditions for the holiday. No criticism of my choices, no dismissive comments about my career, and respect for Daniel as my chosen partner. So far, she was complying, though her stiff posture suggested it wasn't easy for her. "Welcome home, Emily," she said formally, extending her hand to Daniel. "And welcome to our home, Daniel. We've heard so much about you." It wasn't warm, but it was civil, and at this point, that was enough. The evening progressed with an unusual atmosphere, somewhat awkward but not hostile. Ethan and Claire arrived last, their more modest lifestyle evident in their less extravagant gifts and clothing. Ethan greeted me with a genuine hug, whispering, "Thank you," in my ear, though for what specifically, he didn't say. Dinner was a more subdued affair than in previous years. The conversation flowed more democratically, with each person given space to share their news and experiences. When I mentioned a major new client my studio had landed, there were actual questions and congratulations rather than swift changes of subject. When Daniel talked about his architectural work, everyone listened with apparent interest. My mother remained largely quiet, speaking mainly to direct the meal service or respond to direct questions. I caught her watching me several times with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between curiosity and confusion, as if seeing a stranger in her home. After dinner, as others moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, my mother surprised me by asking if I would help her in the kitchen. Wary but willing, I followed her into the room that had always been her domain. For several minutes, we worked in silence, me rinsing dishes while she organized leftovers into containers. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than I was accustomed to hearing it. "You look well, Emily," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Your business must be doing well." "It is," I replied simply. "Thank you for noticing." Another silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken words. She closed the refrigerator and turned to face me fully. "I want you to know that I've been seeing someone," she said, then added quickly, seeing my confusion, "a therapist." My mother, who had always dismissed therapy as something for weak people who couldn't solve their own problems, was seeing a therapist. "That's good to hear," I managed to respond. "I don't agree with everything she says," my mother continued, a hint of her familiar defensiveness returning, "but she's made me think about certain things differently. About expectations and control." She straightened a dish towel with unnecessary precision. "About why I needed everyone to fit into certain roles." I remained silent, sensing that interrupting would derail whatever difficult confession she was working toward. "I was raised to believe that there was only one right way to live," she said eventually. "College, marriage, children, in that order. Success meant financial stability and social respectability. Anything else was failure." She glanced at me briefly. "When you chose a different path, I saw it as a rejection of everything I valued. Everything I'd tried to teach you." "It wasn't rejection, Mom," I said quietly. "It was just me finding my own way." She nodded stiffly. "My therapist suggested something similar. That your choices were about you, not about me." A small, humorless laugh escaped her. "Apparently, I have a tendency to make everything about me." The self-awareness, however reluctant, was startling coming from her. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I simply waited. "I'm not going to apologize for wanting what I thought was best for you," she continued, her chin lifting slightly. "But I can acknowledge that I was inflexible and that I said hurtful things that I shouldn't have said." It wasn't exactly an apology, but from my mother, it was unprecedented. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: validation, lingering hurt, cautious hope. "Thank you for telling me this," I said finally. "It means a lot to hear you say that." She nodded once, sharply, as if concluding a business transaction. "Your Daniel seems like a good man," she offered, changing the subject. "Stable, responsible." "He is," I agreed. "He's also creative, supportive, and makes me laugh every day." A faint smile touched her lips. "Good, that's good." She hesitated, then added, "I'd like to see your studio sometime. If that would be all right." The olive branch was small but significant. "I'd like that," I replied honestly. We rejoined the others in the living room, the air between us not exactly cleared but somewhat lighter. As I settled beside Daniel on the sofa, he squeezed my hand questioningly. I squeezed back, a silent message that things were okay. The rest of the evening passed peacefully, with none of the drama or hurt feelings that had characterized so many previous family gatherings. When Daniel and I left for our hotel, there were genuine hugs and promises to meet again soon, that for once, felt like they might actually be kept. In our hotel room, Daniel asked about my kitchen conversation with my mother. After I recounted it, he looked thoughtful. "Not exactly a tearful reconciliation," he observed. "No," I agreed with a small laugh, but for my mother, it was monumental. She acknowledged that she might have been wrong about something. "I never thought I'd see the day." "Do you think things will really change?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. I think they already have. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to make a relationship possible. A different kind of relationship than before, with room for me to be myself and them to be who they are. In the months that followed, this tentative new equilibrium continued to develop. My mother visited my studio as promised, making a visible effort to understand and appreciate my work. We established a pattern of monthly lunches, sometimes awkward but increasingly genuine. She would probably never fully understand or approve of all my choices, but she was learning to respect them, and I was learning to accept her limitations without taking them personally. My relationships with my siblings continued to evolve in positive ways. Ethan finally paid back the majority of what he owed me, not just financially but in genuine gratitude and respect. Olivia and I discovered a shared interest in sustainable living that gave us common ground beyond family dynamics. Sophia graduated college and even interned briefly at my studio, displaying a surprising talent for marketing. My father, perhaps the most transformed by the events of that Christmas confrontation, became one of my most vocal supporters. He proudly displayed my design awards in his office, introduced me as my daughter, the successful entrepreneur, to his friends, and made it clear through 1,000 small actions that he valued me exactly as I was. As for me, the journey of that year taught me lessons I would carry forward through the rest of my life. I learned that speaking your truth, however difficult, is ultimately less painful than living a lie. I learned that real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to accommodate others' insecurities. I learned that family bonds can be renegotiated and redefined as we grow and change. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that sometimes you have to break old patterns to create space for new ones. That confrontation, though terrifying in the moment, was necessary to disrupt the dysfunctional system we had all been trapped in for decades. The temporary pain made possible a deeper healing that would otherwise never have occurred. Looking around the table at the next Christmas dinner, held at my condo with everyone contributing dishes and conversation, I felt a profound sense of peace. The family before me was not perfect. We still had our tensions, our misunderstandings, our moments of falling back into old habits, but we were trying, all of us, in our different ways, to create something healthier than what we had before. My mother caught my eye from across the table and offered a small, genuine smile that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. In that moment, I understood that sometimes we must risk losing family as we've known it to gain family as it could be. That sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to stop accepting the unacceptable, even when doing so feels like betrayal. As I raised my glass to toast the holiday, I looked at the faces of those I had fought so hard to be seen by, and I realized the most important recognition had come from within myself. The journey had never really been about gaining their approval but about claiming my own worth, about standing firmly in the knowledge of who I was, regardless of who others thought I should be. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who couldn't see your true worth? How did you handle it? And what boundaries did you set to protect yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply to be yourself, unapologetically and completely.